Good morning. My name is Julie Morin, and I'm the Director of IoT Solutions for Smart Infrastructure at Microsoft Canada. I help public and private customers accelerate their digital transformation through Internet of Things. I'm very happy to be moderating this panel discussion on Tales from the Frontline, how buildings are leveraging Azure IoT and IoT. During the next hour, we will be moving from theoretical to literal and focus on highlighting IoT and PropTech examples and approaches from companies who are in this space. First of all, I'd like to thank everyone who has joined and are watching us live. This webinar will be recorded, allowing people who cannot join at a later time to be able to view this. But for people who are listening to this live, we will be taking questions at the end of the discussion, so feel free to use the Q&A function to send any questions you have our way. Now, I'd like to request all our panelists to briefly introduce themselves. Adrian, would you like to go first?
Yeah, for sure. Thanks, Julie. So I'm Adrian Wang, Director of Innovation and Sustainability here at Tridel. Tridel is a privately owned condo developer here in Toronto with about 25 active projects at the moment. We take an avid interest in the space of PropTech as we attempt to create synergies with new technologies in the residential construction space.
Great. And Elliott?
Hi, my name is Elliott Samuel. I'm Senior Director of PropTech and Sales here at Addy Solutions. And I primarily work with various stakeholders across real estate who are looking to employ risk mitigation technology, specifically water damage mitigation technology, as well as potential channel partners that we work with to try and leverage our strengths and provide additional value to our customers.
Great. And Justin, would you like to go next, please?
Sure. My name is Justin Gress. I'm America's Business Transformation Leader for AXA XL Insurance based in Chicago. Amongst the many products that AXA sells, we are very much focused on ensuring North America's top construction contractors. So pleasure to be with you today and looking forward to this panel.
And last but not least, we have Brandon.
Thanks, Julie. Hello, I'm Brandon Vaters, the VP of Operations at One Valet. For the past few years, we've been creating a software that acts as a centralized building operation system for all the technology in a building. Previous to this, I was with Reliance Home Comfort for 6 years, Canada's leading HVAC company, running all of our operations out of Western Canada. I've always had a really keen focus on understanding the needs and wants within a home. Thanks so much for having me.
Great. Well, welcome to all of you, and thank you for joining for today's discussion. Before I start asking our panelists some questions, I'd like to remind our attendees that we will dedicate 10 minutes at the end of the session so that you can provide some Q&A as required. You can also note your questions and type them by clicking on the Q&A button you must be seeing at the bottom of your screens. I will read these out to our speakers after our discussion. Now let's start with my first question. IoT and PropTech are wonderful words, but it's time to hear from people who've actually employed technology advances. Adrian, Tridel has done a number of investments into this space. Can you walk us through the rationale behind the decisions?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, here at Tridel, we've always had a very keen interest in technology, recognizing that construction is one of the last strongholds that yield to those technological advances. It's kind of funny because I've seen various graphs charting out various industries and their productivity improvements over the last decade or longer than that. And actually, construction is one of those rare industries that actually regressed in comparison to other industries. A common analogy that I've heard before is that that illustrates this very well is that if you resurrected a plumber from, let's say, 100 years ago, plopped him on a job site, you'd probably be able to find his way around job site very quickly. But you would never say the same of any other industry or profession. If you resurrected a pilot, for example, put him in a commercial airline, you probably have no idea how to operate the plane. And that really hits the nail on the head, that we recognize that there are a lot of headwinds and challenges facing construction and that we've been very late to the game or the party. So for us at Tridel, we're always looking for ways to increase the value for our shareholders and residents by looking at technology for new innovations, not just change for the sake of change, but really trying to demonstrate value to all the stakeholders in the party.
That's great. Would Elliott like to elaborate on this?
Yes, so, as it relates to, I would pretty much echo a lot of what Adrian is saying, because he sort of hits the nail right on the head there. And that as far as advancement is concerned within the construction industry, that's become a big challenge. And it's also not just from the perspective of technology and the actual operations, but it's also a bit of a mentality thing that's something that is being driven and changed over time. And what you're starting to sort of see is sort of a new guard who are very technology driven, who are very data driven, looking at those markers to sort of inform their decisions and help validate the different approaches being taken across these job sites and operating facilities as well.
That's interesting. Yes, we're definitely seeing some leaders emerging in this space, and it's great to see some of the companies that are paving the path in this industry, very much required in order to achieve smart infrastructure out there. A lot has been discussed on the risk factors and how IoT can address them. Justin, can you walk us through what buildings and decision makers should be thinking in terms of risk management mitigation?
Yes, so it's really important to think about it in a very multifaceted way. Doing what you've done in the past and expecting, a different outcome is not good, right? You need to think about this in a multifaceted way in terms of having a risk engineering plan, having consultants work with you on what you're doing. You need to think about technology as well. You can't think about just one or the other. It's truly both. Water is the new fire. It's a very simple way to say it as it comes to PropTech and property in general and construction. So thinking about how can we help customers, how can we help construction contractors, builders specifically, focus in on the things that will change some outcomes, be more predictive. So instead of just, an incident happening and then learning from it, how can we anticipate those? How can we start to see trends? Data is extremely important, and linking that together into a comprehensive risk management program is key.
Brandon, can I ask you to answer this question as well from a supplier perspective on risk management and mitigation?
Yeah, sure thing. This is a very hot topic lately with risk management, and I think the key here is really consolidating a lot of these various IoT platforms and data stream into a simplified platform. So you're not going to multiple places to look for information. Everything's connected and talking, and it can really streamline your ability to react.
Just building upon this, Adrian, have you seen any direct risk management or resource savings as a result of this type of investment at Tridel?
Yeah, definitely. We've implemented a number of construction technologies in this space that have resulted in either direct risk management reduction or resource savings. We've looked at different things like construction management tools, smart community platforms, building information modeling, district energy programs. There's really too many to list, but I'll just pick two off that list. So very recently, we piloted an initiative with Eddy Home to implement an active leak protection system on our hydronic water systems. And what I mean by that is that we've got very large diameter heating and cooling pipes, and that presents a huge level of risk during the construction phase and also post-occupancy for our residents in the building. And through a few strategically placed valves that were actuated and linked to our smart community platform, we were able to contain the leak that we simulated in this environment, an active building, to something less than 1% of what would have actually leaked through the building, resulting in catastrophic damages. So that was a terrific initiative that really that we launched here at Tridel, and we're very confident in the product and the service that Eddy offers us. So that was a great win for us. Another great initiative that we recently implemented was a construction management tool. So we've been toying around with the idea of trying to bring our trades and our consultants as well as our field staff up to date with all these new great productivity tools that are out there on the market. They're very popular with a lot of ICI contractors, industrial, commercial, institutional contractors. But in the residential space, it's very late to the party again. It's very slow in adopting these new technologies. But we recently sent a survey. We found that about 70% of the people who are using the software actually came from the site. And that was a terrific validation of that construction management tool. And because I'm talking about people who generally still using flip phones or people who haven't really launched into this full force, people who have been on job sites for the past 20, 30 years. And that was just a great validation of the fact that we're on the right path here, that people believe in these technologies, that they're actually enhancing their productivity on site. So again, that was another great win for us.
That's great. And Elliott, what do you think?
Yeah, so we've seen a lot of phenomenal wins as it relates to organizations investing in technology, and I could list a litany of basically case studies. I'll stick to one that focus on resource management from one perspective. So construction doesn't always run perfectly, and oftentimes the end result will be an operating environment that may be slightly less efficient. But part of the key is having the correct points in place so that you can collect data and see things that other people aren't seeing on site. So we've had cases where we found a mechanical contractor pipes makeup water line directly into a drain, and that's causing basically 19,000 plus liters a day of water going through, or toilet flappers broken, which are causing thousands and thousands and tens of thousands of liters of water going through on a daily basis. So from a resource management perspective, just having an understanding of how you're consuming in different areas that you haven't traditionally been monitoring is one really key element of it. And that also ties into risk mitigation, because by monitoring those same lines, to Adrian's point previously, you can pretty much prevent and mitigate significant risks. And we've been in that scenario where off of small lines coming out of a mechanical penthouse where we see significant losses, 80, 90 liters a minute, we're able to catch and stop those in 30 seconds, whereas traditionally those types of losses would be hundreds of thousands to millions of dollars in terms of damage. So a lot of benefit to be gleaned in terms of investment. And part of the challenge, as discussed previously on the last panel before this, was how do you justify ROI on technology when you're mitigating a risk? Because ultimately you're stopping, you can project it going for X amount of time, but doesn't necessarily mean that would take place. It could be less or more, and that's part of the challenge in adoption as well.
That's great. And what are some of the most important considerations for IoT PropTech? I'd like to request all of our panelists to please answer this one. Brandon, would you like to go first, and then maybe Adrian can go after?
For sure. Well, I totally agree with Elliott, with what Elliott just said. The most important consideration right now is ROI. So two questions we're often asked are, will this technology help us rent or sell our units for more? And how can this technology help us reduce our operation costs? And another major consideration is ensuring the technology they select is future-proof and software-based. So this allows properties to keep pace with changing technology. We're often educating the developers and property managers in this area, given how slow the industry has been to adopt leading edge technology. And the last thing I'd like to mention is stakeholders are often requesting a consolidated, simplified experience for both the residents and the property management. Here at One Valet, we provide a single app for residents and a single management portal for property management. We find simplifying these complex systems is absolutely critical, especially with the high turnover rates within the concierge and the property manager positions.
Yeah, so if I can jump on that, I really echo what Brandon said is there as well. I really resonate with the sentiments. I think ROI is definitely also a very important factor, but I think when we're evaluating ROI, we have to take a very broad lens at it instead of just confining it to directly impacted the direct correlation between the return on your investment. I think there's oftentimes more broader implications and ancillary benefits to implementing certain technologies. So say, for example, we've implemented Eddy Home on our Eddy solutions on our leak protection devices. There's more than just how much damage could this have caused the residents. There's ancillary damages to that. Obviously, people in hotels, being evicted from your home because there's remediation work that's required there now. The consumer implication in terms of the perception on the brand of Tridel. There's a lot of ancillary benefits to technology that aren't immediately quantifiable, but I think it's important that we look at it from that very broad lens. The second thing that Brandon said that really resonated with me was how the technology engages the user. We've seen smart home applications being around for a number of years, right? But when you look at Google Home and Amazon Alexa, they really transformed the space because fundamentally shifted the way that people engage with that technology. And so by providing a very seamless integration into these through voice command or through biometrics, it revolutionized that space because people were much more ready to adopt that technology. And technology needs to be ideally seamless or invisible to the user. Ideally, you really want to be able to empathetically identify with what the user is struggling with, where the pain points are, resolve that issue while staying in the background. So I like to think of the best technology, like I said before, as being invisible. I think those 2 points are very important factors when evaluating prop tech or anything in the IoT space.
Absolutely. Justin, what's your view?
Yeah, I've got a couple of additional, considerations for everybody to think about. First off is thinking about the cybersecurity piece of this. When you're selecting a new technology, you have to truly understand, how mature is the company. We've done a lot of vetting at AxeXL to determine, which companies are mature enough and ready to handle our large commercial customers. That we can feel comfortable, sharing and curating that list with. So I wouldn't underestimate that. I think it's important to understand just how all of this works. And then the second piece is around ROI, number one, right? That is very, very important. But what also is important is to have very clear use cases of how the technology or service has worked before. I think that's a big struggle where you see a new technology, you're very, very excited, and you see some numbers, but having that personalization of well, how has this been used elsewhere? What were the outcomes from it? Really goes a long way, I think, in terms of adoption. And then if that buyer has a good experience with it, they're going to use it on other jobs, other buildings, et cetera. But not having that true use case connection makes it a much tougher sell to consider, this being an additional line item in a budget.
Absolutely. And Elliott, would you like to add something here?
Yeah, no, just to sort of echo Justin's point there, it all really comes down to use case and ROI and being able to justify implementing this technology. And part of the challenge too is, we deal with it every day in the marketplace in that we've got great case studies, we've got great data, and bringing that to customers. But at the end of the day, what we often see is customers still want to touch and feel and do it themselves in order to validate, because data can be manipulated from time to time. But in addition to that, people often don't trust things because there's so much noise in the marketplace, which is another big challenge right now, especially in the wake of COVID-19, with technology really being at the forefront of everybody's minds, whether it's from a business operations perspective or whether it's just a general person trying to live their daily life. So that's been, I would say that's definitely a challenge, but it's something that is worth the pain if the use case is pressing enough for you as an operator or as a constructor, because ultimately the alternative is being reactive after the fact. And at that point, it's sort of like the definition of insanity of, doing the same thing over and over and expecting a different result.
Yeah, thank you so much for sharing all of your thoughts. It's such a great exchange of information and ideas. What I'm taking from this dialogue is that, the number one priority is finding that, return on investment and having some clear use cases. And I really like Justin's point on security of the products. That certainly helps, getting adoption in the marketplace and with the AEC industry. And of course, the seamlessness of a product experience, very, very important, and having it be simplified both for the end user, but also for the operator. And another aspect that I really enjoyed hearing about was the education that is required in this space, because there are the early adopters and then there's the late adopters. And so I think by providing clear use cases, a very strong ROI, it'll be very easy to get more adopters into leveraging these types of technologies. All right, my next question is for Justin. Investments in ROI on technology is a big consideration. How can companies approach the ROI question when determining if the investment can be made?
So I think Elliott said it really well in terms of sometimes you want to try it for yourself. And the approach that we've taken with our insureds, our customers, is to conduct pilots around different technologies. Sometimes just for 90 days, doesn't have to be a very long time, but truly getting an opportunity for a customer to experience the product themselves and start to see what benefits that they see. For some technologies, 90 days might not be long enough. Others it is. Some require, a little bit more of a long-term application, but ultimately, giving that experience, and we've taken multiple approaches with that. Sometimes it's helping the client with what to do with the data that's coming out of the system. We've got tons of data science folks that work at AXA Group that we're happy or are happy to help. Sometimes it's potentially co-funding a technology that we're both curious about that we think can help our larger customer base as well. But I kind of look at it in terms of, you don't have to make a huge investment in all cases to get that experience, to understand for yourself from an ROI perspective. You might be able to do so in a more limited way, to experiment and then go from there.
And Brendan, what would you like to add to this?
Yeah, I'm going to outline a few specific examples. I'll see if I can add a little bit more context to this. So our technology at One Valet, for example, can actually help eliminate the need altogether for an on-site concierge, or at the very minimum, help them be more efficient at their job. So this becomes a simple equation of how many hours we save property management's time versus the cost of our technology. The next use case I would touch on is smart door locks. So these are locks that work with Bluetooth or a fob. And by installing these locks on a suite door, it eliminates the need to rekey a unit every time someone moves in or out, or of course, if the master key is lost. And these rekeying costs can be a major line item every year. And another example I would touch on as a measurable benefit is the integration of a smart thermostat. So when looking at heating and cooling cost, a smart thermostat can save up to 20% of the total cost in a unit, which is quite significant. And lastly, having the remote control, I should say, of an access control system allows property managers to not have to send someone to site every time there is an incident or a service call. So instead, they can grant a digital key or remotely open a door without having to meet that contractor on site.
That's great. And before I ask the last question, I'd like to remind everybody that we will have a Q&A session after this. We will be monitoring the chat for any questions that are the participant might have for our panelists. And if you still have time to send those questions in, please do so in the Q&A section. I would like to all the speakers here to kind of answer one question. What's your biggest piece of advice for companies approaching IoT and PropTech? We'll start with Elliott, and then we'll go off to Adrian.
So I'm gonna maybe just start off by echoing a point that I raised previously, in that there's a lot of noise in the marketplace right now. There's a lot of technology out there, and it's very important for those that are assessing that technology to be very conscious, of, to Justin's point previously, use case. Ensure that you're addressing the pertinent use cases to what you're trying to achieve, because there's a lot of nice to haves out there, but then there's a lot of ways where technology can enable us, to Brandon's point, to save money as operators, to avoid and mitigate risk on site. But in addition to that, to ensure that you're doing it in a cohesive way that is guided by your core principles as an organization, and what your financial strategy is, what your IT strategy is, ensuring that there is, again, echoing Brandon's point, a simplified and simple place, a simplified and unified place for people to interact with building systems, whether it's going to be front end or back end, so that on the operation side and on the user side, people aren't bogged down by having to log on to a million different platforms and deal with a million different gateways and things like that. So it's all about the power of great organizations really coming together and finding what fits into what your objective is and what your use cases are.
Brendan, would you like to add to this?
Yeah, I completely agree with what Elliott said. And my biggest piece of advice would be to think long-term, not just what the market looks like today, but invest in a software first approach that is future proof. So in new construction, this is especially important given how fast technology is changing. Decisions on integrating PropTech are made often years in advance of first occupancy. So decision makers need to think not what the standard of technology is today, but what will the standard be when your residents are actually moving into their units. And with a software first approach, stakeholders are no longer at the mercy of outdated hardware and can future proof their buildings. As an example, the One Valet entry console is completely software driven and can be remotely updated instantly over the cloud. So this means that as we improve our software and launch new features, the product that a developer or a property manager buys today will continuously improve without having to swap out that hardware itself.
That's great. And Justin?
So I'll provide a little different perspective. As we started to do pilots with construction customers at AXXL a few years ago, we came away with a whole series of findings that were consistent amongst them. And the number one finding was we're having a hard time, whether this is a large construction contractor or a medium or small size one, we're having a hard time figuring out which technology to select. And then there are a million other questions that go beyond that, such as how much do we pay for it? What we actually released today, you can look on my LinkedIn, as we launched a construction ecosystem tech library. What that means is it's a place for the public to go, not just AXXL customers, to look across different business challenges in the construction industry and look at different technologies that we've curated and put into the library. We've done that either by piloting these technologies or talking with enough of our customers and collecting enough data that we feel confidently putting them in the library. Why did we do this? There's thousands of technologies out there, and none of us have time to go through all of them and make the determination. Just in water filtration alone, we interviewed 14 different companies that are focused on commercial construction application. Even that, I think, is too many for most to go through and make a determination on their own. So we're trying to help with that. Our philosophy is not just to provide an insurance policy, it's truly to be a partner. And this is an area that we've clearly heard from our customers that's challenging. And it's something that we're very much focused on in the go forward to provide a view into these types of solutions.
Fantastic. This has been super enlightening. It sounds like there's really a large opportunity to create impact in the architecture, engineering, construction, and property management firm line of business. Have you thought about how technology will be able to play a role in being able to attract new talents and new generations into construction and to property tech?
I have. I think, there's so many smart people out there doing, some very exciting things. And I look at even a recent experience with COVID. About a month after the pandemic began, we started to see solutions that were geared towards response related to this in terms of applications that already were on the market, but now they're focused on social distancing, contact tracing, et cetera, that are completely applicable to the construction marketplace. So that while it does extend beyond property, I think it really shows that there's a lot of talented folks out there, and the industry continues to attract very talented folks. Some of them I see are coming from, a complete construction background. Others are not, but I think that's where it gets to be really interesting. Is these aren't old ideas. These are new, innovative ones that I think people that have industry experience can help mature in the very, very short term.
Fantastic. If any of our attendees want to connect with the partner organizations that are participating in this panel, please visit the trade show booths in the exhibit hall in the main lobby. Company representatives will be happy to connect and answer any questions. Let's see some of the questions that we have from the audience. Is it clear who will be responsible for post-installation support in smart buildings? Will it be the building owners or facility managers? Anyone want to take this one?
And maybe I can jump on this one, being a developer here. I mean, I think it depends on the type of building that we have as well, whether it's an asset owner or whether it's a condo board. Generally speaking, Tridel builds condo buildings for the most part, and we have a condo board that forms, but there's also a tier warranty period that extends out all the way to 7 years to entail the maintenance and functionality of that building itself. So if there are any issues, typically it is covered under the tier one warranty. Obviously, there's always exceptions to that. But generally, in the case of a condominium, it would be managed by the condo board. In the case of an asset manager, typically they would have professionals who would take care of that commercial deployment as well as implementation and maintenance of that. And so the structure of the building and the type of building really changes the ownership as well as the maintenance of that piece of technology, I would say.
Great. Do you think we should have an IoT committee or some sort of strong community of sorts where people can access knowledge and share learnings with each other when it comes to adopting IoT in buildings?
I think the simple answer is yes. I think people want to learn. I think people want to learn, they want to contribute, they want to hear what their peers are doing. And that's something that's been very important with our customers, is getting them together. We've got one of our folks, her name's Rose Hall. She's leading a bunch of our customers through a tech tapas every month. We take some different technologies, bring them to our customers and let our customers get exposed to them and ask questions in front of their peers. For me personally, I learn the best from listening and learning from my peers in the industry. So I think the more opportunity that can be created around that, the better. People will show up and participate.
I agree. And adding on to that, Justin, what I'd say is, we're all in this together. It's still a new industry, and we're all learning together. And your success is our success, and vice versa. So we should be helping each other out where we can and sharing our knowledge. So a panel like that would be fantastic.
Great. Completely agree. I think it would be fantastic to get a lot of stakeholders participating in such efforts. How do we differentiate between physical risk mitigation and cyber risk mitigation? IoT can open us up to risk if not managed properly. Justin, you kind of elaborated on that in terms of security. Can we talk a little bit about how IoT is great, but without the technical expertise in-house, you do need partners who can help ensure cyber risk is reduced?
Yeah, I think that there's a lot to expand in there. I'm sure other panelists would be happy to comment as well. I would just say, one of the things we look for is obviously maturity of the particular company. What it is that they're offering in the marketplace. Are we the first ones, or do they have some experience? Any company that we specifically partner with, we do look at that in some ways. I think that's very important. I know our customers do as well. Anytime you're letting somebody or something into your environment, into your infrastructure, that can be a particular challenge or risk. So it's not one to take lightly. If you don't have the expertise on your team, there's plenty of companies and partners, likely your insurer, your broker, whoever you use from a risk consulting perspective, I'm sure will be more than happy to help guide the way through some of those more difficult questions.
Yeah, it's I would say one of the number one questions we get asked here when we're talking to developers is how can we ensure the security of the data. Here at One Valet, we've developed our product from the ground up with the cybersecurity in mind. Everything we do is bank level encryption. Our cloud is Canadian Azure, and we're actually even hiring ethical hackers to come in and stress test our system. So I encourage everybody in the audience, if you're involved in this in technology development in this space, you need to have cybersecurity in mind from day one.
Yeah, I just want to echo those sentiments as well. For us at Tridel, this was top of mind for us when we deployed these IoT devices and technologies. Working with One Valet, we actually also hired an ethical hacker on our side to take a look at some of our buildings where we implemented these types of solutions to see if there was any way we could penetrate that. And thankfully, we're able to bridge all the gaps and patch all the holes that was in the system. So it's imperative. I mean, it's very relevant to our discussions, especially with what happened with Sidewalk Labs here in Toronto. I think this was a hot topic for the residents of the community and the communities around here to understand what's the implication of tapping into all these different devices, right? It's really, you've got all these tentacles, if you will, expanding into different devices, whether it's elevators, smart door locks, smart thermostats, the whole security system. Obviously, it creates a lot of different exposure points. And obviously has great benefits, but it's also important to look at it from that standpoint of understanding what kind of exposure are we creating for the residents who are living there, and how can we bridge that gap.
And just to sort of echo a little bit on everybody's points here, at the end of the day, to Justin's point, what it comes down to market maturity and also maturity of the organizations. Oftentimes, if an organization within the PropTech space is going to do some really meaningful business, they're going to need to meet certain requirements. Just as an example, ISO certification is one requirement that a lot of insurance companies will require in order for organizations to work with them. Understanding the platforms and the technology that you're about to embark on is also a really important thing as far as understanding the relative risk, right? Because if you're using certain networks which are less secured, you may put yourself at a significant risk. And to the point of Adrian, with the tentacles everywhere, it's sort of what's going on across our society as a whole. As it relates to social media, as it relates to everything that we pretty much do in our daily lives, we're giving up a certain level of privacy in order to have more convenience at different points. And so it's a very important, you have to weigh and balance those risks out quite clearly before embarking on making that decision and ensuring that from a privacy perspective as well, where is that company storing their data? To Brandon's point, is everything in compliance with privacy acts, PIPEDA? Are they storing their information in the same geographical region as your services are taking place? And how susceptible are you to really getting hacked in those scenarios? So, great points by all the panelists, and ultimately what it comes down is to having that holistic view and understanding what it is. And there's a lot of organizations out there that can help to inform and educate various stakeholders on what they need to do in order to protect themselves.
Great.
I would add one more comment. Developers, construction companies, et cetera, need to understand the reputational risk that's associated if something does go wrong, right? So it's something to take very seriously, because it could damage your reputation, which is a tough thing to come back from. Technology is not going away. So it's not worth having a breach of any kind, whether that be on a personal or a commercial side.
Yeah. Great points, everybody. If you're a contractor, how does a contractor get started to discover all these new technologies to help them reduce risks and provide value to their customers?
So I think there's a lot of different resources out there. One of them is attending forums like this, right? It kind of helps point you in the right direction. Taking an opportunity to talk with your peers as well. I'll plug our tech library one more time, just because things such as that, which is a bit unique, gives you an ability to kind of see a curated list to help you get started. But again, I highlight the importance of thinking about a pilot. You don't have to go wide. You don't have to go deep to start. It's really a matter of I think personally, what is your biggest business challenge? What are you trying to solve for? And focusing on one thing first, especially for small to medium-sized construction contractors who might not have a large budget for IoT or things at this point.
Great. Question for Adrian. When you've worked with emerging solutions providers, have you experienced any pain points in terms of seamless deployment, given that the solutions themselves are still somewhat in development? How do you manage that?
Yeah, definitely. Of course, obviously, whenever you're on the cutting edge, it's a fine line between being on the bleeding edge versus the leading edge, as I like to say it. And we've definitely experienced our fair share of scars on our back in terms of deploying a lot of these emerging technologies. One of the things that we do to mitigate that risk, to Justin's point earlier, is to pilot these technologies. So like, for example, what we did with Eddie Home, for example, on the leak protection side, we piloted that in an active building, but it was on a smaller scale, again, to mitigate some of that risk. But to Brandon's point earlier, we've also shifted in the way that we've deployed some of these emerging technologies by taking a look at it more from the angle of a software deployment. So again, one of the things that attracted us about One Valet was the fact that it wasn't primarily a hardware-based solution, because our development timelines are so long from acquisition to disposition, anywhere from 5 to 7 years. By the time you deploy, that technology can be antiquated once it's hung on the wall. And by then, maybe you don't even need that specific piece of device. And so one of the other ways we can mitigate that risk is by taking a more nimble approach to it, by looking at a software-based solution.
You're on mute, Julie.
Justin, you mentioned COVID, and I'm hoping you guys can expand on this. How will COVID-19 change the way we've been thinking about preparing for smarter homes and buildings? What will the top concerns be for building IoT solutions, in your opinion, going forward?
I would say that everything is just moving faster because of COVID. I think some of the adoption especially, has moved much, much faster than what it was before. I thought things were moving along at a good clip. And like I said, you just find more and more solutions. I don't think I think it's not just COVID, it's bigger than that, right? I think it's people recognizing that there's technology out there that can help them, that it's going to come at a very quick pace, and that they need to really think about what they need from a future perspective versus just their needs today. So think about applications that are expandable, or that combine different problems. But above all else, COVID or not, any solution needs to solve those business challenges in some way. It cannot just be about one specific thing, I think, for that device or that technology to be successful in the long term.
Great discussion so far. We're getting so many questions in the river that it's hard to pick which questions to ask. So thank you everyone for such a strong participation. This one, I really like this question. How can technology provide value for property management and staff on the operations side? But what about the tenants? Like, is this technology something that tenants are asking for? Are we using these types of technologies to attract customers to come and live in your facilities and your buildings? Do you think it's going to be a competitive advantage when you're going to be trying to sell new projects to new customers?
Yeah, I'll kick this off. The simple answer is yes, absolutely. We have the tenant and the resident in mind, developing all these features. In fact, when we sell to a developer, one of the first things we're asked is, can we power their sales center? So we are putting in a bunch of our technology in their sales center, and the feedback we're getting is yes, it's helping them sell what the future of this building is going to look like. What residents are asking for is a consolidated experience, right? How can we communicate better with property management? How can we interact with all the smart features in our unit through one platform instead of 5 apps? Let's have one app. And that's what we're trying to accomplish here at One Valet. So absolutely, these smart features are great for building operators, but I think just as strong for the resident experience.
Yeah, I'll jump in there too. I think definitely, I mean, that's why we're investing so much into these platforms like One Valet, for example, that provide a seamless integration of different programs and software applications. We're definitely seeing that rise in the consumer demand. In fact, if you look at the fastest growing amenity that we're offering right now, I would say that that's a parcel delivery system. And that's largely because of the rise of e-commerce. We've got buildings where they're being inundated with packages from 150 to all the way to 200 packages per day. There simply is no room to store those parcel packages. And so for us, not just on the new construction side are we seeing this, but even in the retrofit market, there's a great application for One Valet that ties into integrated experience starting from their entry phone system, which is a scanner built into it, which scans that parcel and takes it all the way through to the parcel delivery room. So we're seeing a tremendous growth in that market. It's no longer about just a bricks and mortar in terms of constructing these beautiful museum pieces of dining rooms and party rooms and whatnot. It's also, like I said earlier, how does a homeowner engage with those spaces? You know, we're spending a phenomenal amount of money constructing these common elements and these amenity spaces, but if they're not being used in the first place, then you begin to question, why do we spend all this money there, right? And I think if we can use a tool like One Valet, for example, to engage the homeowner in actually using those spaces, it's going to create that much more value for the tenant, the resident, ultimately the developer who's constructing that space.
Great points. And how do you all think that we're close to getting a centralized smart building platform? Do you think it's realistic to kind of expect this to continue being multiple systems for different purposes, from the operator to the tenant, that can't communicate with each other?
Yeah, I'll kick that off. I mean, you've basically just described, why we created One Valet is to centralize these systems and take a software first approach. So the short answer is yes. We're not only very close, but we're here today. We have CCTV, access control, smart thermostats, smart door locks, entry phone systems. The list goes on and on, already integrated into one platform. With the software first approach, what it allows us to do is keep pace with the changing technology. And if a new player emerges in a few years who has the best door lock that we've ever seen, we can make that partnership and integrate with their software, which really allows us to be quite nimble.
Great. Question for Elliott. We haven't heard from you for a few minutes, but are there challenges presented once we have IoT data that's collected? Like, do we have difficulties aggregating data or data being available for analysis to the right people for speed of access?
I'd say that all depends on the platform and the technology that's being deployed in place. And what it comes down to is, we're dealing now in an age where there is an immense amount of data. And part of that challenge is, what are you going to do with that data? And having a clear understanding right at the outset, before you've deployed a system or deployed a use case, what your objectives are, what your KPIs are, and what you're trying to achieve. Otherwise, you can get lost in a sea of data that's completely irrelevant to you. So what's really important is to have a really targeted approach at what you're trying to achieve, to make sure that you have really clearly defined metrics on what success means and what you're really looking to achieve and what you're looking for. And that's how you're going to be able to leverage the appropriate data to either justify a use case or invalidate it at the end of the day.
So how do we look at pricing models proactively change to meet the future proofing and technology innovation? Because obviously technology changes fast. Some of you have kind of, talked about how the technology will continue to change and the adoption will change as well. So how are we addressing pricing models?
It's a great question. If you guys don't mind, I'll sort of kick this off. Part of the issue at the end of the day isn't even really, addressing the pricing model, because your pricing model needs to be adaptive based on the asset classes that you're dealing with. That's the first thing. But after that, what it comes down to is there's a whole bunch of other external challenges, to the point that Adrian made earlier. When you're employing technology right at the start and you're putting it into a spec, by the time you actually get people inside of that building, get that building operating, there's a good chance that some of that technology may be antiquated and old. At the same time, there may be use cases which, spring up between that 2 to 3 year construction period, let's say, that need to be addressed, and you've already established budgets in place that need to be either adjusted or changed on the basis of technology. And that becomes a big structural issue as it relates to getting new technology in when you might be in, let's say, a later stage of development. So that's sort of my 2 cents on there, but I'm sure Adrian could probably contribute quite a bit to this.
Yeah, no, those are great points, Elliott. And I think that's the right way of looking at it as well. I would just offer a couple of caveats whenever we're talking about ROI or anything financial. I think to my points earlier that I alluded to, you have to take a broad look at it to understand not just what the immediate impact is in terms of the correlation, because many times there isn't a direct linear correlation between what the return on this specific piece of investment is. So for example, if I were to, poll the audience and ask them, what sort of productivity improvement would you see in terms of using the Microsoft suite of products? I think a lot of people would really struggle by being able to quantify that exact number. I can't really say I'm 30% more effective because I've got access to Outlook or Word or Excel. But it also reveals a lot of inner biases that we have when we're looking at construction-related productivity improvement tools. So it's strange that we look at it from such a narrow lens when it applies to a different environment of productivity, I guess, in the first place. The other thing that doesn't make any sense to me that seems strange is that when you look at procuring any sort of equipment to enhance productivity. So say, for example, one of our laborers requires a chipping gun. You wouldn't ever question why, what the return on that specific piece of investment is versus using a hammer and chisel. Generally, there's just a mindset that you use the right tools for the right applications. But whenever it relates to a software productivity tool, there immediately calls into question, what's the ROI on this? How do you know that for sure? What's the percentage or likelihood of that actually happening? And it just seems that there's a heavy bias away from software applications and tools. And I would just call into question, what kind of lens are we looking at this through? Do we have that broad perspective? And do we have any inner biases that we're looking at this through that lens?
Thank you, Adrian. Brendan and Justin, any last parting thoughts as we conclude today's session?
I would just say it was like amazing points from Elliott and Adrian. In terms of the pricing model themselves, we're trying to add as much value as possible throughout this entire process. Tridel, for example, the package that they purchased from us, it's evolving every day. And we're not going back to them trying to say, hey, you owe us another $1 a month. It's not like that. We sold them what we call an MVP, a minimum viable product, for some of these features. But what we're actually going to deliver is going to knock that out of the park. And that's just some of the value add we're bringing. And I think that's great for the industry and great for future business.
Great.
I would add, try to understand what it is you're buying and what are some of the costs that are going to come down the road. If you're not sure, ask a peer, ask another company that may have done, business, get a referral, become educated on it, because I think that's always the challenge. There's always, there could be a surprise factor. You can do a lot of simple work to prevent some of that surprise factor.
Fantastic. Well, thank you so much for all of your contributions today and participating. It's been an absolute pleasure. I'd like to thank all of the participants for taking time out of your day, as well as our speakers and panelists who shared our experiences and their wonderful insights. I'm sure for me and everyone who's been listening, we've all learned quite a bit from this discussion. The next session will be starting at 12 p.m. Eastern time. It's an innovator pitch competition featuring 3 tech companies and entrepreneurs that are presenting their business ideas to a panel of judges that include executives from PCL Construction, Tridel, Microsoft in the IoT space, which will be myself, and then PropTech industry will then announce a winner at the end of the day. So we want to wish you a wonderful rest of the day, folks, and thank you so much for participating. Have a great day.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye.